Released. My Tongue Will Speak Visions. Written by Prince Trisket. Read for you by Gemini Wishes. Chapter 2. Summary. Tim stares into the void. The void stares back, and it fucks with his data. Jason stops a riot, with mixed results. The bats could use a little help from their friends. My heart beyond human speech, said Tisserwat. I comprehend only the cries of birds and the shatter of glass. Anne Leckie, Ancillary Mercy. T-minus 1 week, 3 days, 12 hours, 1 minute, 50 seconds. The morning brought Dick back from the watchtower and bearing gifts. Had Tim's request been formally approved by JL Requisitions? No. Had it been actually submitted? Tim wasn't certain. Everything post-patrol had been a little hazy, and frankly, his thoughts upon waking were largely dominated by that frantically scrawled glyph. You're a lifesaver, he said as Dick dragged a deliberately bland package out of the Zeta and dropped it off at his work desk, and endured the tired but still affectionate side hug and hair ruffle that came with it. I know, I'm your favorite bro. You can just admit it, Dick yawned. I'm gonna go hit the sack before Alfred finds me. Try not to break reality. Bold to assume Alfie hasn't already, Tim muttered, ignoring the rest of what Dick had said as he turned to busy himself with retrieving his spoils. Dick's response was lost once he got his paws on the alien particle cannon and set of miscellaneous reflector arrays and sensors. In Earth tech, this would take an installation the size of a small town to achieve. Thanks to the various JL members who like to meddle with time in the multiverse, however, they had the tech necessary to seriously downsize it. That didn't guarantee that Tim would be successful, but it helped. All he had to do was grab a few more things from WE's lab and be on his way to Robinson Park. Before he left, he checked on the process of his search algos, sent the results Oracle's way, and sent her a request to finalize calculations for parameters he'd already set up. They made a good team. Babs was a more proficient hacker and he more of an engineer, and they often swapped workload, projects, picked up each other's tasks and notes as easily as a muscle and tendon in coordination. T-minus 1 week, 3 days, 10 hours, 20 minutes, 40 seconds. Naturally, Gotham wouldn't let him work in peace. It was after fighting off a third group of intervening goons that he sighed and spoke into open comms. I might need a little bodyguarding while I get this set up. Oh? Are your skills insufficient to the task? Damien's response was whip-quick, as always. But these days his sniping was just about as performative as Jason's bite. Not that Tim would suggest such a thing to their faces. As long as it didn't come with renewed fratricide, he was mostly content to let it slide and dish out a little light payback from time to time. Robin, Bruce began, but Tim interrupted. Not while trying to mount the bracket for this reflector array on the side of the building, brat, he said, and repositioned his feet where he was repelled over the edge of said building. Then he sent a disc flying into the nose of a goon that had gotten up and was advancing on the place where he was hooked onto the wall again. They went down with a cry and a spray of blood from their nose. Tim double-checked the height from the ground to the anchors he'd set against the completed calculations, courtesy of Babs. Red Robin, Bruce sighed. I am near. I can come to your aid if necessary, Damien said, and Tim understood it as the gesture it was. That was how he and Damien were recently. His little brother lashed out on first instinct, and then offered something to make it up. Tim tended to do the same. They wouldn't be bats, frankly, otherwise. It took another hour, and the work of both Robin and Hood guarding both Tim and the various reflectors, sensors, and other tech he'd mounted in the area surrounding the park. But it was ready. The rig wasn't pretty, but it would work. Probably. Tim crouched near the outer edge of the reservoir access road, gloved hands running final diagnostics and set up on his mini-computer that was connected to the particle firing module. The main body of the device looked like a miniature industrial vacuum bolted to a gyroscopic tripod. Its core was repurposed from that watchtower particle cannon that had once been designed for controlled microcollisions in alien atmosphere. It wasn't meant to be portable, definitely wasn't meant to be fired on Earth, and absolutely wasn't cleared for use inside city limits. Good thing the bats broke laws all the time, then. The perimeter of the array surrounding the monolith was no less haphazard. Half-alien reflector arrays intended to provide a bounded field, sensors borrowed from both the JL and WE, and one now retooled holographic projector from a LexCorp machine that had been sequestered in JL storage. He'd owe Dick a favor, for sure, especially if he managed not to create a black hole over Robinson Park. What he wanted to manage was to observe the local effects on gravity of particle collisions. This included, in particular, the behavior of gravitons and their corresponding supersymmetrical particles, as well as the observed mass states of others. It was a crucial first step to determining if this was a multiversal incursion, and, if so, to get some data on just what scientific mechanisms were at work and how they might affect local space. Now, if only Jason would get off his back and be quiet, like any self-respecting bodyguard.
"You sure you didn't build this thing out of a microwave and paper clips?"
Jason scoffed. The lines of his shoulders and back were tense, despite the relaxed stance he broadcast. Tim didn't look up. He closed out of the diagnostic window, pushed his hair back off his brow, and stood. "Microwave wouldn't provide the containment necessary," he said. "That's why I needed the watchtower reflectors." Jason squinted at him. He just knew it, despite the hood.
"I don't know what that means, but this looks like something that explodes."
"Even better," Babs broke in over comms. "It makes black holes."
"Well, that's just what the alley needs,"
Jason muttered.
"Red Robin,"
Bruce said, and Tim sighed with the knowledge that Babs' little joke had activated his bat paranoia.
"Are you certain this array will be properly contained?"
"Yeah, I'm sure, Dad," he bit, and stepped back, casting his gaze around the park as if he could zoom in visually to double-check the integrity of all his work. He ignored Spoiler's, "Oof, pulled out the dad card." "Robin, any more movement around the installations?" "Negative. All is secure at the moment, Red Robin." "Thanks, Baby Bat."
"So, just to be sure,"
Jason began again, and Tim knew he was being fucked with. "Will you just watch the perimeter?" Jason sighed and pushed off his bike and took a step back, gaze sweeping, hands up in a gesture of mock surrender.
Yeah, I am watching. I'm watching you poke at multiversal aliens with the League's spare parts. You're welcome, by the way."
Tim muttered something impolite under his breath and activated the emitter. There was no sound of firing or anything of the like beyond the rig's machine guts whirring, but Tim felt the psychosomatic pop as a cluster of near light-speed particles was launched into the boundary field of the monolith. Sensors lit up in a rippling of green and blue. The dedicated display on his wrist did the same.
"So, what's that mean?"
Tim didn't answer. He reviewed the results to ensure that there was no catastrophic failure and refired. The readouts streamed data. The first few results were inconclusive, and Tim felt his nerves mount, the same way that they did any time his work would either visibly succeed or fail in front of everyone, and continued. He was keenly aware that at least Babs and Bruce would be watching the stream of data along with him. Once they were done and could be sure there wouldn't be interference, they'd probably be sending the same data to the watchtower. In between sequenced rounds, he observed a change. Particle drift and some lag resulted in additional sensors lighting. Then, more. His mini-computer was quick to identify and isolate a recursive pattern of gravitational rippling. When it was displayed, something snagged in Tim's chest. It was the glyph. That glyph. The one he'd all but carved into his notes, appearing in the data stream. The humming intensified and Tim's jaw clenched. His fingers flew over to the display, capturing the image and the data in as many formats as his software could and sending it to his own servers before something could happen. Jason said something behind him, and Babs something in his ear. He didn't answer, didn't even really register it. The glyph was shifting, the local gravitation field continuing to fluctuate in a way that sent cascading data through his array. It was deliberate. It was directed by intelligence. And then the monolith flashed. Not in the display, not on the quantum level. Invisible, green light, infinitely brief, and then the array died. The bounding field collapsed and the particle emitter burnt out. Tim started towards it on instinct before Jason grabbed him around the waist and wrenched him back. Tim registered that people were still talking to him. He looked back at his wrist. The data was gone, blanked out.
"Red?"
Jason began, both beside him and patched into comms.
"What just happened?"
"I think..." Tim licked his lips, mind racing and stalled simultaneously. "I think it saw me." He pulled himself out of Jason's grasp. Luckily, his rig had continued to be non-explosive, and, at a glance, there were no unbounded singularities in the park, though he would need his feet up and running again to confirm. A beat of silence.
Well, that isn't horrifying at all,
Spoiler said.
Status?
Batman called, and Jason beat him to it.
Looks like the Ghostbusters rig is fried to hell. No explosions, though, and reality is intact.
As intact as it was before. Did you cross the streams?
Duke added, light but still tense. I swear to God, Tim began, and then the hum spiked, sudden and sharp, like a tuning fork against Tim's spine, and he staggered. Jason grabbed his arm, stabilizing. That snowing sensation returned, the quality of the hum changing and resolving into something new. That glyph, shifting in the same recursive pattern, not real visual sensory input, but an internal knowing, like casting his mind's eye back through his memory and finding a simulacrum of something he'd seen.
You good?
Jason asked, and Tim finally noticed the concern creeping into his tone. He righted himself and nodded. Yeah.
So, are we going to ignore the fact that that thing totally flash-bombed us?
Spoiler asked over comms.
And why green?
It was responding, Tim said, to our scan. There's something happening. I don't know if it's just me, but it's psionic in nature. There's a symbol that it has broadcast to me, I think, in 3 ways now. I don't know. I need to get back to the cave.
Red Robin, calm down.
Batman's voice cut through Tim's emerging mania, and he found himself straightening. All Robin response that he grit his teeth against.
We have the data stream saved. Return to the cave. Between you, Zatanna, and Oracle, we have quite a bit of new information to collate. Let's reconvene.
Right, Tim said. On my way. T-minus 1 week, 3 days, 10 hours, 4 minutes, 20 seconds. After Timber's little experiment, Jason managed to make it all the way back to his territory, ready for an early lunch of food truck gyros, before Babs called him right back to Robinson. He was starting to think he ought to just camp out. Not that he ever would. He could already hardly think, and sitting under the alien monument to chicanery would not help.
We have signs of a crowd forming right on the edge of the object's area of influence,
she'd said, and her tone held an apprehension that Hood didn't like. Barbie had good instincts. In all likelihood, something was about to go down.
About 20 people right now, but there are more arriving in clusters. Police presence is not going to be sufficient to control them. This could turn violent quickly. Why are they there?
Tim asked over comms.
I'll head back. No, you continue to the cave,
Babs said.
And as to why, they're agitated, but it's largely undirected. They seem to be trying to force their way past the edge of the interference. Fine,
Tim had grunted.
But do they think they can, attack it?
I don't think they got much of a plan,
Jason drawled, retrieved a tranq gun, and got on his way back to the reservoir.
I'm headed that way.
Excellent. Spoiler can assist before she's off shift. If I have to,
Blondie chimed in. By the time Hood arrived on the scene, the crowd was already near critical mass, a teeming surge of people, mostly adults mid-20s to 40s, about 3/4 men and the rest women, only a couple of teenagers, had shoved their way past a paltry police barricade. One of the officers was already radioing for backup, and Hood imagined it wouldn't be long before SWAT arrived. This situation could easily escalate with police mishandling. Something told Jason that Gotham's finest would be all too glad to take out some of their current frustrations. He couldn't see the people right on the edge of the thing's influence well, but it looked like they'd stopped. It was well documented by that moment that people couldn't make themselves move beyond the barrier, and they had to have known that. Dread coiled in Jason's gut as he realized what they were trying to do. They were trying to shove their way past the barrier using sheer numbers and mass and hysteria. It was so stupid. Immediately, Jason identified a couple of the bulkiest members of the pack, those with the most inertia and weight to throw around, and tranked them. That was when they all collectively noticed the arrival of the Red Hood. Instead of stopping, though, they pushed harder. "Hey, Jason started before he saw it. The first person breached the barrier. As they fell to the ground, they twisted, and Jason saw their face in exquisite detail as their expression was mangled by a silent scream.
"Damn it, they've shoved someone past the border,"
he said as he started grabbing people by the collar and hauling them away.
"They fell instantly. Not dead, but screaming. Signs of obvious psychic distress. We need crowd dispersal."
Normally we'd go sonic, but no idea if that will be effective with this damn humming,
Tim said.
Oracle, can we disperse gas via drone? Not in a timely manner.
Jason almost fell back as the thick, middle-aged man in front of him collapsed against him. Instead, he managed to save it with a sidestep and a bodily toss of the offender back away from the monolith. 2 more people fell in. One of them managed to scream for a second before they went unconscious entirely. The other went immediately into a fully hyperextended backbend on the ground.
Okay, screw this.
Jason upholstered one of his weapons and fired it into the air.
Everybody back!
He shouted, and that finally seemed to put the fear of the Red Hood into these shit stains. Next to him, a teenager took an elbow to the gut that sent her sprawling across the border. Jason went after her, all instinct, and his body froze. He just couldn't push. Her ankle was so close to his hand, and he just couldn't reach. Where she landed, her face twisted and then split in silent agony. Her hands flexed, and her body spasmed in a series of horrific seizing. She was just a kid, and who the fuck knew what this shit would do to her? Red Hood saved kids. He needed to reach her. His goddamn arms wouldn't... He stepped back and drew his grapple, aimed just over her leg. He could snag her pants and reel her in like a damned fish. But he didn't want to fire it. His finger just wouldn't move. The musculature itself refused to flex.
There are 4 inside the circle now,
he bit out through gritted teeth.
I can't reach them.
Everything in him rebelled against this pitiful bullshit. He was Jason Todd, the Red Hood, and he would save these idiots. His vision swarmed with green, and then he pulled the trigger. The grapple sailed past her leg, and when he retracted it, it snagged her jeans and reeled her in. She was pale, wide-eyed and unresponsive. Spoiler arrived, took the girl. Jason heard Babs say she'd called for an ambulance. He hardly registered it. For the moment, the green was overriding whatever fear response had kept him immobile. For the first time in years, he leaned into it. When he surfaced, he was on a rooftop overlooking one of his own safe houses, racked with full-body shakes and a hoarse throat.
Red Hood, do you... Todd, answer. Jason!
He snapped into himself all at once.
What happened?
He bit out and began to make his way down the fire escape, footsteps uncertain and shaky like he'd been drinking.
Thank God, Hood. Are you okay?
Babs asked. He nodded, realized they probably couldn't see him here, and then cleared his throat.
I'm fine. What happened?
You got those rioters back from inside the monolith perimeter,
she began.
Though it looks like it triggered your...
It wasn't pit rage,
he said.
It was the pit, but it was different. It let me push past the psionic block and fire my grapple into the ring.
Well, whatever it was, don't do it again.
Babs sighed.
Seconded,
came Tim, wry in the way they all knew meant he was trying not to show he was shaken. Kid had a good poker face, but they were all bats in the end.
And?
There was 1 casualty. The rest are comatose, but alive.
Jason swallowed against the string of curses that wanted to tear its way out of his throat. He may have blinked out, but his throat felt like he'd done a good deal of shouting.
You did more than I suspect anyone else could have.
Damien's voice was tentative at first, and then assertive.
Perhaps your experience in resisting the pit influence allowed you to override the psionic interference. It was well done, Todd.
Well, from the demon brat, that was one hell of an endorsement. He didn't answer. He fell heavily into his safe house window and onto his couch.
I need someone in the alley,
he said.
For a bit.
The signal should be out soon,
Babs said.
Get some rest.
T-minus 1 week, 3 days, 9 hours, 27 minutes, 31 seconds. While Jason was saving rioters and throwing himself into the green pit inside himself to do it, Tim was back in his seat in the cave, chasing patterns of light that could mean nothing. While his brother audibly came down from his, whatever it was, over comms, Tim listened and tried not to feel like it was a personal indictment as he loaded the raw data and other captures from his backup server. It didn't help that it had happened mere minutes after he'd left the park, and it further didn't help that someone had died. He thought about calling Jason on a private channel, about checking in, but he thought better of it. The last person Jason probably needed when he was triggered and obviously upset would be Tim, of all people. Still, if he pulled up a couple of camera perspectives that bordered the safe house he figured Jason had gone to and confirmed for his own sake that his brother had made it in one piece, that was his own business. And otherwise, Tim knew better than anyone the value of investigative work. He knew. Sitting at a desk and solving this puzzle wasn't any less valuable than patrolling. Tim wouldn't in a million years devalue his own work like that, or Barbara's or Alfred's. But that knowing didn't do anything to dull the itch to be out there throwing himself bodily in the line of duty. On top of that, he knew that this particular pattern of light was worth investigating. It meant something. It was communicative in nature. A message popped up in a window in his rightmost monitor. "He'll be all right. We'll make sure of it." Thank God for Babs. He nodded, knowing she'd see, and closed it out. Luckily, that strange green pulse from the monolith didn't appear to have scraped or otherwise damaged the readings they'd retrieved. He had it in several forms: the raw data, the isolated recursive signaling, in still images and video captures of both the display and of several views of the monolith. He loaded the raw data into an indexer to run, sent a copy of all the files to Babs, the Bat computer, and the watchtower, and then went to review the results of his earlier search algorithms. Before he could do that, however, a klaxon alerted someone arriving by Zeta. Someones. Plural. He looked back and found Batman emerging first, which was a little puzzling given that he'd thought that Bruce was in the city meeting with the mayor and commissioner. The puzzle grew, however, when he saw Flash and Captain Marvel arriving after Bruce. "Batman," he said by way of greeting. "I see we have visitors." Translation: why are they here? Nightwing mentioned calling in temporary reinforcements. Bruce's usually even tone sounded forced. Translation: I don't want them here either. "I see." Translation: you got bullied into it, didn't you? Then, turning to the newcomers, "Flash, Captain Marvel, good to have you on deck." In the next moment, Wally was drawn up next to his workstation, shrugging as expressively as always. "Hey, it wouldn't be Wednesday without some cataclysmic weirdness happening, especially in Gotham. Though I'm not gonna lie, this is new." "It's Thursday."
"Hey, Red Robin," Marvel waved. "I hear that threat is of a potentially magical nature, so it was recommended I provide backup."
"That makes sense," Tim nodded. "Though I'd heard Zatanna was our primary magical contact on this at the moment." Oracle broke in over the back computer's audio.
"Zatanna is staying at the New York site for now. The League wants to ensure that there are heroes savvy with both magic and science at each site, given that this is likely some sort of magitech."
Wally scoffed.
"I hear her most recent theory has to do with ghosts. I didn't know spirits were so tech-savvy."
Under other circumstances, Tim would be just as skeptical as Wally. But he had both not managed to catch up enough to be appraised of this ghost theory, and also found it laughable to rule out anything based on personal belief in a world plagued by gods, aliens, magic, metas, and sci-fi tech. "I haven't gotten the details on that yet," he admitted, and turned back to Bruce. "So are you taking them to the object site?"
"Shortly. I believe we need to collectively summarize our findings, and then I'll provide the current plan for this first encounter,"
Bruce said, and transmitted something from his wrist to one of the mid-sized Bat-computer monitors.
"With ghosts,"
Wally muttered, and followed Bruce to the round briefing table.
"I'm getting everyone on comms,"
Babs said, and then in short order the rest of the Bats acknowledged as they signed on.
"Let's begin. Status updates,"
Bruce grunted as he sat opposite Wally and Marvel.
"Agents in the field first."
"Huntress and I have maintained the barrier around the object successfully,"
Robin began, then hesitated.
"barring the attempt in which Hood and Spoiler were involved. There are police blockades at major points of interest. Both Blackgate and Arkham have increased their security presence. There is talk of unrest at Arkham in particular, and one attempted outbreak has already been stopped. Confirmed. Block C inmates attempted to riot with the aid of 2 plants, but the attempt didn't breach containment."
Oracle chimed in.
"I'm wrapping up here."
Spoiler jumped in next.
"The attempted mob has been dispersed. There were multiple injured in addition to the catatonic victims, but they've been transported to receive care. Otherwise, nothing major since the missile incident." "Tensions are high throughout the city,"
Signal added.
"It's nearly boiled over in a couple instances, but so far it's been contained."
There were a few other miscellaneous updates, but the status out on the field hadn't changed significantly. Most of the clan was involved, and shifts were about to rotate. Damien resisted the most, but he'd already been out for far too long.
Moving on, Bruce continued. Oracle, I understand you and Red Robin have coordinated on investigating the object.
Correct. The first significant update is that Satana has identified the presence of what she calls heavily saturated death magic. The details were not forthcoming. It doesn't seem that there is an expert on the subject, but she mentioned that it most likely has to do with ghosts.
That elicited a mix of reactions. Derision from Wally and Damien, a sort of quiet concern from Marvel, and various levels of intrigue from the rest.
I thought the threat was multiversal,
Dick asked.
It still may be. We don't really know much yet. We've gathered a lot of data, but there are large gaps in our knowledge. On my end, I've been looking into a suppressed government entity called the GIW, Ghost Investigation Ward, it seems, that may know more. Their cybersecurity is anomalously good. Black Bat is en route to a facility of theirs in Wisconsin to perform reconnaissance and plant network scanners as we speak.
She took a breath, seemed to collect her thoughts.
The search results provided by Red Robin on the GIW broadcast keywords returned further references to ghosts, also known as ecto-entities, some heavily redacted research on the subject, and online traffic seems to hint at a location in Illinois that is under a similar information blackout.
Thank you, Oracle, Bruce grunted. Captain Marvel, can you provide any insight into the death magic claims?
Well, Marvel huffed and rubbed at the back of his neck absently.
As Oracle said, there is no expert on the subject. The, entities in question interact very rarely with the physical plane, which lends credence to the multiversal context.
Yes, well, multiversal may not be the right word, Marvel continued. It might be more like extra-universal, but I'm no expert. Extra-universal? Tim asked.
I think we should wait for confirmation on Zatanna's theory before we dive further into that.
Bruce intervened, just as Marvel seemed to figure out what to say.
Red Robin, do you have anything to report?
A beat of silence. Well, Tim began. Frankly, I haven't made concrete progress on the data yet because it's so fresh. However, I've made a few observations. You've all been made aware of the observation of negative frequency light. It may correspond with the phenomena observed today, which may be either quantum, which is to say microdimensional, or macrodimensional, or larger than three-dimensional in nature. There doesn't seem to be an active portal or incursion into an alternate universe. At this juncture, I'm tempted to say that this object may be more like intersecting with or overlapping our reality.
My brain hurts,
Spoiler whined, and at that moment her bike pulled into the cave.
Can you spare the physics lesson?
What does that mean, though?
Duke asked. As I said, I haven't been able to work with the data enough yet to determine. Tim ignored the from Damien. The other point of note is, well, really strange. Go on. Just bear with me. He hesitated. Last night, I had a strange dream that I believe may have been the result of either psionic interference or an attempt at communication from whatever entity is behind the monolith. He powered through the sounds of people reacting to the statement. When I woke, I had unknowingly drawn a glyph of some sort on a notepad. Today, that same exact glyph was recreated visually in the recursive fluctuations observed. I'm pulling it up on displays now, he continued as he did so. Then, after an observing beat, when the object flashed green, the glyph appeared again in my mind in the same manner as its previous message did. It's obviously some sort of communication, and I expect that the data captured today will be the key to understanding it. There was a long, considering silence on comms.
So, Wally drawled, just to summarize, we're going with alien ghosts from another dimension? Is that really what we're thinking? So far.
Bruce's response was equally dry.
Red Robin, if your hunch is correct, then I'm concerned that you may have drawn the attention of this entity.
Careful, old man,
Jason piped up for the first time. He sounded tired, but was powering through it like any bat.
You're getting dangerously close to showing emotion there.
I am the knight. Tim scoffed.
Leave it to Drake to attract the attention of ghost aliens,
Damien added. and everyone ignored Bruce's "no names on comms." "Would you prefer they talk to you, Demon?" he said.
At least I would.
"Boys," Bruce called. "It's clear that we need to progress on multiple fronts. After this, I'll be accompanying Flash and Captain Marvel to observe the object. Our last order of business. We have a formal schedule. The UN and the League finished drafting a diplomatic strategy about an hour ago, but the United States has declined to follow Justice League First Contact Protocol. For that reason, the UN has deferred to Gotham as a primary negotiating site."
We still don't know why there's one of these monoliths in Gotham in the first place,
Dick interrupted.
"That is unlikely to become clear without asking the entities responsible,"
Bruce acknowledged.
"But we have the strongest containment and public response records, and therefore have been handed a certain degree of seniority in the situation."
Yeah, 'cause we deal with the worst,
Jason muttered.
"Boys,"
Bruce reiterated, and Wally snickered. Tim suppressed his own laughter, and he heard Spoiler laughing from the lockers.
"A pad and media nest are being constructed on the edge of the object's perimeter to serve the needs of any first contact and negotiation scenario. It should be done in about a day. Mayor Haiti and Commissioner Gordon will be there alongside their respective staff. I will also attend alongside Red Robin, Nightwing, Flash, and Captain Marvel."
Zatanna seems to think that we will receive a
Oracle paused.
subconscious impression of when they're ready for our council, as they put it.
"What are our diplomatic objectives?" Tim asked.
"We want to normalize communications and establish non-hostility if at all possible,"
Bruce began.
"But we should be mindful of the threatening nature of these entities' sudden appearance. Additionally, their message hints at us—"
The living,
Jason interjected.
"at the living having committed some sort of offense. We should be prepared for talks to hinge on this. Any information we can obtain beforehand will help us to be better prepared. It's difficult to establish more concrete goals without further information."
Tim nodded. "Normalization of relations, non-hostility, potential for reparative negotiation. We should anticipate that the U.S. government will complicate things." Someone snorted.
"Naturally. We will work to establish contingencies in the meantime."
Bruce nodded.
"For now, you're all dismissed."
Then, after a moment's thought,
"Good work."
Tim silenced his calm in anticipation of chaos.